Hello, everyone. Welcome to John's podcast. Today on the show, I have guest Jamie, and we're going to be talking about complexity of diversity among varying viewpoints regarding the death penalty.
Hello, I'm Jamie. I'm a social worker. I've been a social worker for 15 years. Dealt with a lot of people who have been in really hard situations and have had a hard time, and have helped them make it through some of those hard times and come out on the end better.
Great. Well, happy to have you here. Well, first of all, I would like to talk about some recent history regarding the death penalty. Around 1953, death row had around 131 inmates, and 62 of them, or over 47%, were executed. In 2013, death row had grown to 2,979 inmates, which is over a 2,000% increase, and 39 of them were actually executed. The statistics have shown over the years that a person will have spent a significant time on death row. Back in the 1980s, they spent around 6 years, 2 months, and now, around 2013, they're spending around 15 years, 5 months on death row. And the leading cause for this statistic was contributed to the inmates' sentences or convictions being overturned, around 58% to be exact. And not because of execution, which was around 24.8. And that was retrieved from Pros and Cons of Current Issues 2019. You may wonder what states have legal death penalty. There's actually 29 states within America, ranging from Alabama, Wyoming, Kansas, Kentucky. Seems to be majority of more mid to western states within America, and there's 21 states where the death penalty is actually illegal. And these seem to be more of the eastern coast states, like Delaware, Maine, Maryland. And this was also retrieved from Pros and Cons of Controversial Issues 2019. Death row removals by reasons from 1973 to 2013. Let's look at sentences or conviction overturned. Those came to over 3,000 convictions that were overturned. And people that were actually executed during this time was only about just under 1,500. And people died by means other than execution during that time frame was right around 500. And people with commuted sentences was just under 500. And then there's some other means people either died of an illness or were released from whatever for whatever reasons, died of medical issues, old age or whatever. Those were a lot fewer, less than 100. Now let's talk about your viewpoint as a social worker regarding the death penalty, Jamie. What are your feelings on that?
Well, personally, I don't agree with it.
Why is that?
Well, I feel like there are other means that we can use to try to help rehabilitate inmates.
Like what? What's another means for rehabilitation?
Well, there's currently, our many inmates in prison who have the ability to participate in self help groups, um, religious groups, maybe have a chance to find God and ask for forgiveness for their sins.
All right, that's a good point there. In your opinion, and speaking from a social worker perspective, do you think, and I'm talking focused on the truly heinous criminal, the one with no remorse, who's committed crimes throughout their entire life, do you think that type of individual um, generally can be rehabilitated?
I think any individual can be rehabilitated. Yeah, I don't think it's right to sentence someone to death um, for their actions when they can learn from them by sitting in prison. They can, have life terms and possibly try to give back or have a chance to change. They can try to better themselves by maybe enrolling in college or school programs and other various self help groups that are available in many of our prisons.
Okay. I'd like to play the devil's advocate a little bit here. Um, this type of individual that I was speaking of, who's only known to be a criminal, only has been raised that way. Um, that's the only way they know how to live their lives. And you're telling me that someone can go to prison where generally they learn to better their techniques of to be a criminal, that they will become rehabilitated in that type of situation?
Well, and I see your point, but I guess my question back to you would be, how will having them sit on death row for 15 plus years do them or the taxpayers any good either? When looking at cost, it's actually more expensive to sentence a offender to death row than it is a life sentence.
And I see, according to the DPCI 2019, that was a statistic. But the way I look at that is, you can either look at that as the glass is half full or half empty. Um, my point of view as a police officer sees that issue as a kind of a half glass half empty type of situation, because if the uh, death penalty was actually carried out like it was meant to be, then an individual wouldn't be spending 15, almost 16 years on death row before an outcome actually occurred. So there's no way that one can say you're going to spend less money on someone on life without parole than executing someone at a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah, and I guess if the death penalty was carried out in the way that you feel it should be and not prolonged as long as it is, then yeah, it shouldn't cost as much. But the fact of the matter is that it isn't done that way. They sit on death row for 15 plus years and tie up our judicial systems with all their appeals to their cases to try to get off a death row. So it just seems like even more of a waste of taxpayers' money when we could just sentence them to life and not be clogging up our criminal justice judicial system with dealing with all of their appeals.
And I would have to agree with you on that aspect. And there is a flaw in the judicial system that allows someone who's been convicted, truly convicted of their crime, to have appeal after appeal after appeal, and pardons and stuff like that will give these heinous criminals who've never known anything but criminal life a second, third, fourth, fifth chance at life. And for someone who can take a life so easily, it's hard for me to justify allowing that person to be set free.
So, what I'm hearing you say then is you think two wrongs may make a right. So, if your child, for example, was to be punched at school, you think it's right for them to punch the kid back?
Not necessarily, but I do believe in the right to defend yourself. And as a police officer, we have to we stand for the weak and weak people that can't defend themselves. So I guess that's part of the reason why it's hard for someone like me to say that it's okay to let someone go for what they've done and not be punished ultimately for a similar type of crime.
Yeah, and I see your point, but I think sitting in prison for the rest of your life is a pretty good punishment.
Well, and it would be, especially if what type of crime these type of people are in there for all sorts of things, and I imagine life in prison, no matter what you were there for, it would be hard. So, well, that's about all the time we have for today. I appreciate it, and I respect you, your position, and for what you do for our community.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you. Have a good night.